Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am delighted to have an old friend and colleague of mine from my staff college days. And he had a very successful career in the Royal Marine, doing some gritty, tough stuff and learning lots about life and leadership. And then he went on to Australia, where he became a captain in the Royal Australian Navy. And now, all that time he's been learning about being a coach. He's an exceptionally good coach. Now he's turned himself into a coach who brings that wisdom and experience to people in Australia. We're lucky to have him here in this country for a short stay. Without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. My name's Jim Hutton. Scot by birth, now an Australian citizen. I'm a carver of wooden spoons, and I'm a life and leadership coach. As Jonathan said, I'm former Colonel of Royal Marines and latterly a captain of Royal Australian Navy. And I've spent the last 10, 11 years in Australia helping to develop their emerging amphibious capability, which is the movement of troops from ships to sea via landing craft and helicopters in a tactical environment. Over to you, John.
Fantastic. And while we're just talking about that, before we talk about inspiring leadership, I imagine it must be such an interesting time and also a challenging time as you see the rise of China with, building aircraft carrier, concreting over the Paracel and the other islands around there, sticking missile batteries on there. It must make the Australians and finally the New Zealanders are waking up as well, go, we need to do something about this and we need to collaborate with others. What's your thumbnail of what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think what we've seen across the world is the removal of warning time. I think most Western countries, including Australia, for many years believed that if a war was ever to come, it was 10 years away. And we had plenty of time to think about it. And you could mobilize your system. But you'll read the commentaries in the press and the academic literature. The warning time has shrunk. So if things get nasty, you're going with what you've got. So you better have some decent stuff. And I think what we're seeing across the Western world now is an investment in defense, in the quality of the soldiers, sailors, and airmen that you have, in their training, and the kit and equipment that they operate, carry, and use in defence of their countries.
Yeah, well, it is a really challenging time, and this is when more than ever we need good military people. So the wisdom and experience you're sharing, we also want to combine it with stories of people that you've known. We were talking, you and I, Jim, about inspiring leaders. And, I think you mentioned three. You mentioned General Gordon Messenger, you mentioned Rob Metcalf and J.J. Thompson. Just tell those listening, because they may not know these individuals, what they did and why you found them inspiring leaders that you wanted to call out. Yes,
absolutely. Rob, we were subalterns, lieutenants, young lieutenants together back in the early 80s. He was just ahead of me in training, and we ended up serving in 4-5 Commando up in Scotland together. Rob's a deep thinker, someone who's constantly educating himself. He did really a short career in the Corps, and then took advantage of an opportunity to go to Australia and start a leadership and coaching business in Sydney, which he did really successfully. And he's had 3 or 4 businesses in the Australian area over those years. And now he's working, supporting United Nations, supporting their deployed teams in some of the most arduous environments, helping their leaders be as effective as they can be in those environments. He's been a best friend. He's been wise counsel, and as a fellow coach, every time we get together and work together, which we have now and again, we just bounce and learn off each other. Tremendous character and great family man.
Yeah, it is interesting. One of the joys of this Inspiring Leadership podcast, I met some fascinating people around the world. Jeff Nischwitz, who's a friend of mine in America. We sort of co-coach each other. He's now sort of COO of a legal business, but a really good coach. And he runs programs for it's called Mankind, for men getting together and sort of working through their kind of issues. Really interesting guy. And then Will Hogg, who's in Switzerland. Will was, I think, a light infantry officer, but now coaching business. And then a podcast friend of mine, Graham Brown, who's over in Singapore. And these kind of friendships, the interesting thing is we haven't met each other physically because of COVID, but we've become really great friends and we share ideas and things. And it's nice that you've got that Royal Marine background with Rob Metcalf and now him so successful in business as a leadership coach. I think there's a lot of the best officers who can make that transition into becoming great leadership coaches with that humility, humanity, and humor you and I talked about. What about if you called out Gordon? Tell people about General Gordon Messenger.
So Gordon, again, we were subalterns together in 4-5 Commando. I think when I was OC Zulu Company, commanding one of the rifle companies, he was the adjutant, working for the commanding officer. And then he relieved me as OC Zulu when we were halfway through the tour in Belize in mid-80s. Can't remember exactly when now. But Gordon was a huge character. A sort of hail fellow, well met, nice as pie guy, hugely professional, but quietly humble, but with a razor-like sense of humor, very, very able in bringing you down to that size, with the level of sarcastic application of his wit and repartee. And one of those guys that you just enjoy being in his company. So many years, well, it'd be about 2002. I was sitting somewhere and saw a signal saying that there was no second in command for 40 Commando. He was the commanding officer. And so I wrote a rapid message to the disappointer, as we call the chap that organizes your career, and said, I want to be Gordon's 2IC. And he said, oh, you can't, you're already a lieutenant colonel. I said, bust me to major. I want to be Gordon's 2IC. I want to get back to a unit. And so quick chat, Gordon said, yeah, I'll take Jim. So I went as his 2IC in 2002. And the first thing I had to do was go out to America and plan Exercise Black Horse, which was a combined arms exercise with the 7th Marines, part of the 1st Marine Division at 29 Palms in California. So I went out there, but I just kept my lieutenant colonel rank on because I knew I'd get more done. So I got access to the divisional commander and the regimental commander and jacked up this absolutely hoofing exercise for the unit. And we took 40 Commando out there and did some great stuff. And then, of course, we came back from that, and in early January, we got warned off for Optelic, the invasion of Iraq, and we were the lead commando group. We were on point, and so we started planning to seize the oil infrastructure in the Al Faw. And myself and 5 others were locked in the joint planning space in HMS Ocean for 3 months as we toiled around the Mediterranean and into the Red Sea and finally up into the Gulf. And we planned our part of the invasion. And we were the first troops in under Gordon's leadership. And Gordon empowered me to plan the assault. He took care of his company commanders and all the leaders, from corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, companies. He worked with the leaders, and I made the plans, to his intent. And we pulled off what was mission impossible. Conduct a night aviation assault against a heavily defended position, against our doctrine, as our doctrine is not to land where the enemy is, it's to, use some guile. We had no choice, and we were catastrophically successful and took no casualties.
Wow.
Just putting 650 Marines onto 3 targets
Wow.
simultaneously. So
wow.
Yeah, we just did our 20th anniversary last weekend, and I think a mark of the unit is over 200 of the lads turned up. 200 of the 650 appeared at Norton Manor Camp in Taunton to just remember and share their experiences, drink a few beers, and it was absolutely lovely.
Well, congratulations on that. I mean, that kind of experience, planning and war fighting, few have. And in the leaders that I meet today, you know, the issues that they get caught up with are small beer compared to what you had to do. And Gordon went on to become Vice Chief of the Defence Staff. What is he doing now?
Well, he's a constable of the Tower of London.
He is, isn't he? That's right. Yeah.
Constable of the Tower of London. And I actually met him for a cup of tea yesterday and had a great catch up. And he's got a portfolio of interests. He's on a number of boards and a number of sort of think tanks. And he's, you know, people like to be in his company because he thinks and he's got things to say.
Yeah. Well, he's a lovely man, and you might remind him. He probably won't remember me, but I remember meeting him at Windsor Castle. We have a Windsor leadership get together, various CEOs and generals and admirals, and he was great there. And we had his predecessor, Richard Dannett, who was also the constable. Yep. Obviously, Inge was also a predecessor. I worked for him as his ADC and survived, but sort of almost psychologically damaged for the rest of my life, I think, as a result of that. And also Nick Horton. I went to the Tower for a Goldsmiths Company event, and we had Nick as our guest, and he was a previous constable. So do say we'd love to have Gordon on if you'd chat with him. And JJ Thompson, you mentioned JJ Thompson.
Yes.
Tell people listening what JJ did and why he's an inspiring leader.
So JJ, he was a Royal Marine, served his time as a subaltern in Borneo. So he had very early operational experience as a lieutenant in the Corps, fighting in the confrontation. And when I came across him, you know, twice when he was COSBS, Special Boat Service, and he was CO 45 Commando, and I joined as OC Zulu Company. He was a commanding officer. And there was a couple of great things about John. One, he was very quiet. He was more comfortable talking one-to-one to people than in large groups. He was very quietly spoken. He was a hugely competent orienteer. He loved running and orienteering, and would far rather talk about that than anything else that anyone else would be interested in talking about. But there was a couple of occasions up in 4-5 when he came. We were doing mountain training, which we always did in the October-November time before we'd go to Norway for our winter deployments. And we were up and we were doing the Anarchigach Ridge in Glencoe, which is quite a interesting and demanding yomp across the spiny ridge at the side of Glencoe, and we're taking the whole company along it, 150 Marines in full gear, weapons, everything, you know, doing this as part. It was a sort of culmination, and JJ said he would come and join us, and so he picked us up at the Devil's Staircase, which is at the southeast end. We're yomping up. We get on the top. It's 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It was one of those, you know, the day in Scotland when the sun comes out. It was boiling hot, and we had a bit of a water stop, maybe, you know, a third of the way into it. And I said to JJ, I said, "Is it okay if we let the lads relax jackets, take their jackets off, and just yomp in t-shirts?" And he went, "Yeah, provided that they're all black or green t-shirts." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, sir, they are." So give the order to strip off jackets. And I had briefed the lads ahead of time that no, there's only one colour for your t-shirt, you know, or colours, black or green. And of course, they took they take the jackets off, and right down, you can see this ridge is going ding, 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 and right at the front, maybe 100 men forward, this guy peels his jacket off, and he's wearing a green T-shirt, but it's luminous green. It's luminous green, and you can see it. It was like a beacon. It was maybe 3/4 of a mile ahead. I was on the ridge line, and JJ just turned around to me and looked at me. He said, "Are you going to tell him, or am I?" Everyone put their jackets back on. We'll sweat it out because of one Marine who couldn't, listen to the detail. He was Mr. Unpopular. But, JJ's view on the world was war is black and white. Combat is black and white. You live or you die. And the mistakes that get you killed are the basics. And he was just always on at people for the basics. The simple little things like jumping up and down to see if you're rattling before you go out on patrol. The things you're taught, checking your Marines' feet to make sure they're not, getting trench foot if they're operating in wet conditions. Where you put your machine gun when you stop, so that if you get ambushed or you have a meeting engagement, your gun's in the right place to do something to help you. So he was all over those basics, and that rubbed off on me in a very big way. Great guy.
Yeah, well, look, thank you. 3 very special people. And of course, you've had the gift of meeting a whole variety of special people. You and I were reminiscing about our Staff College intake, who accumulated 64 stars. Now, for those who don't know the armed forces, a star is like a brigadier or a major general. Brigadier is 1 star, major general 2, lieutenant general 3, and a full star general 4. And there used to be field marshals, like the field marshal I worked for, Peter Inge, who was the last field marshal. Got appointed as field marshal and then closed the rank off, which I thought was very clever. Pull the bridge up so no one else can, the rope ladder up so no one else can climb in. And of course they get a pension for life at full salary, which was no small thing. But yeah, we did have exceptional talent, also very intense. And that's the balance, isn't it? Being competitive and comparative without letting it ruin you. And I think at times when I looked back, I probably got too competitive and too comparative. And I think the mask I was wearing, I now have ripped off, and I'm just happier being me. Jim, let's have a look at your life journey. What shaped you, how you grew up. You've done some amazing things. What were your carers, your primary carers like? Was it your parents? Was it teachers? Who shaped you as a leader? And tell us a bit about your life journey. Maybe take about 10 minutes on this, Jim.
Yeah, sure. So brought up in the town of Ayr in Ayrshire, home of honest men and bonny lasses, as we say. A mum and dad and a younger sister and brother. We're about 3 years separating the 3 of us. I went to a nice little primary school where you learn pretty quickly in that environment how to look after yourself. I'm not religious, but I was of a Protestant family. But in those days, the town was a bit segregated. So I could walk the long way to school, which was safe, or I could take the shortcut through the Catholic estate and get and risk getting a bashing if I got caught. But it was that sort of that sort of environment. And I can remember, in my little Protestant primary school, we'd run over to the Catholic school and stone them at playtime, and then they'd come and stone us at lunchtime. That was the kind of way things happened, and we didn't think too much about it. But it made, when I then became a Royal Marine officer later, and was serving in Belfast, I kind of understood why people behaved the way they did, and I realized really quickly that you were a product of your background. It wasn't, you didn't necessarily have a choice in these things. If you were brought up a particular way, then you held a set of views. It was up to you to decide whether they were right or wrong. You didn't get a vote in it early on. You were there. If you're born one side of the tracks, you were this. If you're born the other, you were that. So it kind of helped shape my views, and it meant I think I was better culturally as a result of experiencing that and seeing it. But early days I did the Cubs and the Scouts, and then joined the Boys Brigade because my mum went to a church and dragged us along there. And actually, the church was good fun if you were a kid, because the Sunday school and then the youth fellowship and the Boys Brigade were a great great means of learning and defining what the difference between right and wrong against a set of Christian values, which of course as you grow older you realize that Christian values and Buddhist values and Muslim values, they're all basically the same. They define what's right and what's wrong. And if you live, doesn't matter which set you live by, if you live by them, you be a reasonably good person. So that set me up. I left home at 17 because I wanted to travel, and I joined the Royal Navy. And I was sort of 3 months into Royal Navy on the Dartmouth training ship as a midshipman, which was HMS Hermes, which is a commando carrier. And we were on 4P2, 4 Papa 2 mess deck, 150 midshipmen and 1 mess deck on the ship. And across the gangway was the Royal Marine Barracks. And there was 30 Royal Marines as part of the ship's company. And those Royal Marines were the only people that treated us civilly in that 3-month deployment. Because the Matlows were awful. They treated us terribly. But I took a real shine to the Royal Marines. And as soon as we got back, I said to the Royal Marine captain who was on the staff, I'd like to transfer. And he said, join the queue, be at the gym 6 o'clock Monday morning. And there was about a dozen of us turned up. And we spent an enlightening 6 weeks being trained by the colour sergeant club swinger, physical training instructor, on rope climbing and jumping over boxes. And he got us fit as fiddles, so that we then went on to the potential officers course, and absolutely blew that away. Did another Admiralty interview board and was passed for the Royal Marines. Wow. Which I then joined in May 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And then my journey from there was, young officer training was a year in those days. And then I went to 4-5 Commando as a subaltern. We went straight on operation into Belfast, which was an eye-opening experience as a young subaltern. It was during the hunger strike. Bobby Sands had just ended his life, and there were riots in Belfast every day, every night for the first 2 months of our tour. And it was exhausting, but we learnt our trade and we learnt our craft. And, we lost guys, we captured guys, and, we did things that we thought we'd never do. In terms of tactical actions, and it was enlightening and hard work, and really learned about the how good Marines are, when you task them and lead them well. And then from there we went to Norway. They sent all the subalterns to Norway to get a winter qualification, become Arctic Cubs, because you need to do 3 winters before you become an Arctic Wolf. And that was the start of a love affair with the snow. And I think over my year, I did about 10 different sorts of winters over my time at different stages. And what a fantastic soldiering environment. Like the jungle, it demands you to have a very high state of personal administration, because you have to overcome the environment in order to be able to be effective as a soldier, sailor, or airman. It just really makes you on another level. And I think those who have soldiered out in the jungle or cold weather environment are top of the game.
Yeah, and I just want to come in because this is a fascinating story. I want you to continue on with it. Going back to at the Protestant school and going into the Catholic side, I imagine that's probably why you're a good runner and keeping fit now. You had to run like hell to get through there and avoid the beating. But you're right. When in the Green Hounds, when we served in Northern Ireland, some of the officers were Protestant, some of the officers were Catholic. So they went, "You Protestant bastards," and I went, "Actually, he's Catholic and I'm Protestant, so it doesn't really matter." Oh, right, okay. And then very interesting, being a midshipman. My father was a midshipman, hence his hat at the back, and he was a midshipman on HMS Belfast in the Korean War, as it was firing onto the Chinese and the Russian emplacements. Of course, here we are again, and this could rear its head again, fighting the Chinese. Who knows when that's going to happen? Your winter experience, great admiration for that. But you and I were talking about Wim Hof and going in the cold plunge. I mean, you had all that kind of training. God, hardcore stuff. In fact, while I was sitting in the freezing cold water this morning for my 2 minutes, I thought, what am I even worrying about? Jim, who I'm going to interview later on this morning, he's been doing this for years. And so just sit there in the cold water and just do your 2 minutes and stop whinging about it. But I was reading Sir Ranulph Fiennes' book when I was on holiday, and of course his trips to the art. And then of course I was reading Across an Angry Sea by Cedric Delves, and when they landed on the glacier and all the winter training and how things went to ratchet. And I just think you have to have this hard training so that war doesn't become so difficult. And so tell me more, but I just think great admiration for you with the winter training that you did and all the other training in Belfast.
Well, that's right. So, as I say, we did lots of, over the years, I worked in different units in brigade headquarters, some tours with doing maritime counterterrorism with the Special Boat Service. Fascinating stuff. I did an exchange in Germany with 2nd Battalion, the Queen's Regiment. Went back to Belfast with them. We had some great results there, and I managed to capture 2 active service units, our company alone, which, as you know, is no mean feat.
That's wow.
And they were great stories about how they came about. Did 3 tours in different jungles in Brunei and Belize with companies and units. And then about 12 amphibious floats, which really is where I sort of earned my mastery in planning and conducting amphibious operations, which really is what brought me to Australia. And in between times, so 5 years in NATO in a maritime amphibious headquarters in Naples, which was an absolute joy. And there I was training and putting the NATO response force amphibious forces through their paces for a good time. And out of that, I ended up going to Afghanistan as one of the core staff and being the 1-star combined joint operations officer in the HQ ISAF in 2008. Working for General McLean and General McKiernan as their ops guy. Tremendous experience, really interesting, working at that level of what is tactical command, but very much at the operational setting and strategic setting as well. Fascinating, 56,000 troops.
And Jim, just staying with that, people listening to this, we have a mixture of military people listen to this, but a lot of CEOs and a lot of people who aspire to be leaders in the C-suite in different businesses. From all this experience you have, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 tips that you take from this and you give to people in business? And you say, from my learning of planning operations, being involved in them, there's so many lessons, but if you could pick out 2 or 3, what would you say?
Well, when I talk to companies and industry, I usually base my talks around 3 things: know yourself, know your people, and be a good communicator. And I think it's tremendous important for any leader to really sit down and figure out who you are. Who is Johnny? Where's he going and how's he going to get there? 3 basic coaching questions, which for some people are really difficult to answer because they've never taken any time to sit and figure out who they are. who are they? And of course, it changes over your lifestyle as we go through the stages of aging, which we all go through. Your wants, needs, and desires change, and so you have to keep reevaluating that as you go through. So having a good understanding of who you are and your conscious competency level on the things that you're involved in doing helps you build the team around you to reinforce your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses, such that you and your team can be effective and reach their true potential. So when I'm talking to people, I use examples from my military experience, either lived, i.e. I've seen it, I've done it, or I've read about it. And you know, reading is a great learning. There's so much to go. And sometimes reading reinforces. I had this chat with Gordon yesterday. You know, we didn't have a mantra in 40 Commandos. We prepared for our mission. But in reading Hal Moore's book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and of course that was converted into the film with Mel Gibson, and you might remember that was they did the helicopter assault into Idrang, and thought they were meeting a minor opposition, and it just went to hell in a handbasket, and ferocious fighting, and before he could extract his battalion from that fight. But when I read his book, he talked about, his mantra was, what's one more thing? One more thing. Planning never ends. And so you come up with your plan, and then he would say to his company commander, so what's one more thing you can do? And they would do that, and he said, right, what's one more thing? And never stop asking yourself that question, what's one more thing? And we did that, not using the mantra, but that's why we were so successful, I'm convinced, in our operation in L4, because we had the time to plan and we didn't waste it. And once we had a basic plan, we just refined it and refined it and refined it. And an example would be, we had a primary landing site for all the helicopters. And of course, we couldn't use any reconnaissance. Everything was electronic. We were looking at air photographs. We're trying to figure out what the surface of the ground was, but we had no intelligence on it. And we weren't allowed to put people in to look for fear of compromising the mission. So it was all electronic and best guess, and our engineers poring over maps and charts and things. Oh, we think it'll be this one. There's a big clear space in the middle of the main target. That was the landing site. But then we said, well, what happens if it's compromised, or it's rubbish, or we can't use it? What else are we going to use? And there was a road structure, a road grid inside the target that we worked out would wide enough to put the Chinooks and Sea King helicopters onto, and the US MH-53s. But there were telegraph poles, you see, down the sides. So we need to drop them. So we put assault engineers in the first wave, and their job, if the landing site was compromised, was to go and blow those telegraph poles down. Now, in my mind, I thought telegraph pole, big dot of wood, about that size, you know. But the engineers, being, you know, living in the land of P for plenty in terms of how much DEMS kit do we need, thankfully didn't listen to Jim and went, nah, we better take, just in case, you know, some extra deck cords, some extra P4. The actual telegraph poles were concrete, and they were the best part of 1 meter wide at the base.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And of course, the first wave landed on the ground, broke through this thin crust of about 1 inch of hard crust and into a quagmire of mud and sand.
Oh, no.
Sunk right up to the bellies of the aircraft, and barely got off the deck. I mean, they were pulling max power to get the helicopters out, and all the Marines jumped out, and it was horrendous. They had pulled themselves off the landing site, get into hard standing, and get into the fight. So the LS was useless. So we had to go for the secondary. But every Marine had in his top right-hand pocket his compass, and it was set to the bearing that you needed to go from your helicopter to your rendezvous point. So because we had a second-rate LS, we issued every Marine a second compass in his top left-hand pocket.
Wow.
With a bearing for the secondary LS.
Wow.
So that it was, we had the ability to plan for,
Wow.
and so the loss of the LS was seamless. The engineers ran over, blew the poles. The second wave came in on time.
Wow, Jim, that's a legend story. You must write your book. You must write your book. Jim, this is fascinating. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this. Okay, we spent more time on this, but I'm really pleased we have. Can you just in a couple of minutes tell us about when you then moved to the Australian Army and ended up as a captain in the Australian Navy? Sorry, the Australian Navy. So tell us in that bit of the story.
So I hadn't seen my second son Ewan for a while. He was traveling in Australia Easter. And so Sally, my wife, and I decided we'd come out and visit him. Where are you, Ewan? Oh, we're in Adelaide. Right, we're coming. So on the flight over, I texted all my Australian buddies and said, this is my program. We're going to Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney. This is the route. If anyone's around, let me know. And this chap called Rick Barr, who had served in Afghanistan he was commanding the special forces there while I was the chief seat, chief ops guy. And we'd been neighbours in the village where we lived. And he said, yeah, I'll come. And he met us on the Yarra. And we're sitting there having a bit of a yarn and a couple of beers with Sally and Ewan and Rick. And I said, what are you doing? He says, I've just taken over the 1st Division. And what's on your entry? Oh, I've got this amphibious thing. I've been to, I'm now the joint capability manager for the new amphibious capability. I said, but you don't know anything about amphibious. He went, I know. He says, but you do. If I asked, would you come? I said, Sally, you want to come to Australia? And she said, yeah, I could live here. And Ewan's rolling his eyes going, oh, that would never happen. Well, that was April. By the November, we were in Australia.
Wow. Wow.
And, it wasn't all Rick's doing by any means. It was a good friend of mine, Will Taylor, was the defence attaché in Canberra. And I told him the story. And he said, well, actually, Chief of Navy has asked for a Royal Marine. And so we made it me. And I came in November that year and sat in the fleet headquarters working for Navy to help develop Navy's ability to bring in these 3 massive new ships that they were buying. One of the Mounts Bay class from Britain and 2 brand new Spanish built landing helicopter dock ships, which they then called HMAS Canberra and HMAS Adelaide. So we brought them into service, trained the crews up how to use them from an amphibious point of view, brought Army on board and worked with Army to learn how to live at sea and operate from the sea, create a pre-landing force, which they didn't have in the Australian Defence Force at that time, the combination of divers and reconnaissance, snipers, small boats people that could operate from the ships at distance at night up to Sea State 4 to insert the eyes and ears of the commanders and create a culture of a commander of landing forces and a commander of amphibious task groups to work together with one joint integrated staff.
Wow.
That's what we've achieved.
Well, Jim, what a great achievement, and congratulations on that. Hey, look, there's so much. We need a few days for this. But let's go and have a look at a few of the other things that I'm interested in hearing from you. In all your experiences that you've had, Jim, I would love to hear about your proudest moment in your life, happiest moment, and also a dark moment, and what you learned from both those moments in your life.
Well, I think without a doubt, my happiest, proudest moment was being part of the leadership team that brought all of 40 Commando back intact from Telic 1 after what was described as Mission Impossible, and we've been through that. That taught me the value of planning. And then my other proudest moment was seeing my son Jamie pass out as a Royal Marine, and then go on to become a sniper, which was almost unbelievable since he'd been the most fidgety, butterfly-ish individual as a kid, And I thought, how are you ever going to quieten down to have the discipline to be a sniper? And he did, and he passed, and he then went on to support the directing staff in the sniper wing at the Commando Training Centre because he was good. And so that was tremendous to see that happen. And then my other proudest moment was seeing my wife after she'd raised the children largely without me, because I think she calculated at 20 years of marriage I'd only been around for 10 of them. And we've just had our 40th anniversary, and she reckons 20 max. Because most of the time in Australia, I've been at least 150 days away per year, doing this work. So yeah, she's soldiered on. But at age of 40 plus, she trained as a midwife, and
wow.
and her midwifery skills at Winchester, which I was really proud of. That was a great thing to do.
Fantastic. And on a more somber note, Jim, you have a dark moment, and I wonder if you would share that.
Yeah, too many, to be honest, John. Look, losing my son, Jamie, he was killed in a training accident at Lulworth, preparing for his second tour of Afghanistan. Tragedy above all. He was only 23. He had all his life ahead of him, but he was doing things he loved to do. And it shouldn't have happened, but it did, and incredibly hard thing to bear. But that was bad. And then
I'll just stay with that one, Jim. Sorry,
yeah, sure.
sorry to say for your loss. It was awful. What did you learn from that? Because you're a hell of a guy. There's a depth to you which is exceptional. But when you get hit with something like that you have no control over, you weren't there, you couldn't stop it, you couldn't protect him, just 23 years old, sort of somebody following in your footsteps. As you reflect now, years later, what's the lesson for others who might go through the similar thing, lose a child of theirs?
Well, it's a great question. I think, Sally and Ewan, his brother, would agree that Jamie lived his life to the absolute fullest. And he squeezed everything he could out of those 23 years. And I think we all kind of look at ourselves and go, are we maximizing our lives? And Ewan just woke up. Jamie died the day Ewan graduated from uni. And Ewan just went, that's it. I'm not working for the man. I'm going to live my life. And he saved up and went traveling, and he's still traveling. He's still traveling 14, 15 years later, and he's living his best life. He has two passions, snowboarding and surfing. And so he puts himself, he works to snowboard and he works to surf. And that's his life. And he's now been about 5 years in Japan, up in Hokkaido in the mountains there. And he's just had over 120 days boarding. It's like he's living his best life. So that's what he did. And Sally and I are constantly evaluating, whether we're doing the right thing and making the most of what we've got in the time together. And I think that would be the advice I'd give everyone. Coping with the loss, like you can't control it. You have to let your kids go and live their lives. And it will be what it will be. Some of us get a long time, some of us don't. It is life.
I'm just so sorry for you, and clearly I have nothing like that. But when I think back to my father being killed when he was 33, and he was, as we discussed, you and I, and he's in the Royal Navy like you, he was a Fleet Air Arm fast jet pilot. And his co-pilot who lived and the pilot who said he died and I should be dead instead because it was my aircraft, my Buccaneer. He was test flying, so it would have killed me. The fault on the turbine that went through and caused the fire and so on. The co-pilot said, Jonathan, he lived his whole life. It just was 33 years. And that was his life. That was what was going to be. And he made the most of it. He lived it to the full.
Yeah.
And I, even now, I just want to make sure I live my life to the full every day. And you know what? If I die today, I've had one hell of a life. And like you, coaching and helping others, which is what my wife Lee and I do. But we also got a charity for violence against women and girls. South Africa, Kenya, Uganda now, throughout the UK, helping serious organized crime with these poor women who are going through abuse and trafficking and being used by different men and things. So that's where we can make a difference in our lives. And if we've made a difference to just one, it's worth it. Jim, thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry about Jamie getting killed. Thinking back to that younger time, if you could travel back now, Jim, to your own age, 16 to 18, and there's people listening who've got children that sort of age, what bit of advice, don't worry about this, but that really does matter. If you met the young Jim and you go, hey kid, this is what really matters and this doesn't, what advice would you give?
I have reflected on this, and one of the things on everyone's lips nowadays is the whole business of resilience, and how resilient are our young people. I look back and I failed loads of times. Before I even joined the Navy, I'd failed to get into the Merchant Navy. I'd failed to get in as an engineer at Sandhurst. I'd failed to join BP Tankers. I don't know why I failed all these things. I even tried to the RAF to be a pilot. Couldn't do that either. But I didn't give up. I didn't go, oh, that's it. Life's over. I picked myself up, dust myself off. What else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? And even then, once I became a Royal Marine officer, I tried out to be a mountain leader, and I was a bit of a stroppy guy in those days, and I didn't really like the way the officer commanding the Mountain Arctic Warfare Cadre was running the course that I was on. So I spoke up, and he gave me a chance to shut up and sit down, but I didn't. And I got kicked off the course on the last day.
Oh, no.
9 months.
Oh, God.
I stopped by my principles, and so I wasn't a mountain leader. There you go. That's it. But, I was miserable for a couple of days, but then you move on and do something else. My advice to parents is, failure is a good thing. It's good for kids to fail at stuff. And your job as a parent is to help them realize that there's learning to be had from those failures that will make them stronger and more resilient going on. Because life's about ups and downs. We follow a sinusoidal path. When I had my sort of psych eval just before I left the Australian Navy last month, I went in and tongue-in-cheek, I went into psych and I said, okay, I want to know why I haven't got PTSD. Everyone seems to have PTSD and I haven't got it. What's going on? What's wrong with me? It was a tongue-in-cheek go, and we had a good chat about it.
Did they say you have got it?
No, I've not got it. I've not got it.
But a few of my good friends, one who did 4 tours at Hereford with the SAS, he sadly has had it quite badly. Yeah. But it was some 8 years after he left the army, and the army went, oh, it's too late. But that's often when it happens. And you think it should be a lifetime of support for these people who've served, particularly when they've done what they've done. I mean, 4 tours, Special Forces, and they still won't help you. I think that's poor. But he's a modest man, so he won't ask for help. Yeah. But that's, of course, what they need. Hey,
That's that. I should just say, John, that's this shirt I'm wearing, Remount. That's the charity I support, and it's an equine therapy charity, and we put PTSD sufferers on horseback, on stock horses for programs in New South Wales, rural New South Wales, and it's just a fantastic means of getting people to give away a bit of themselves to the horse. And it works really well for PTSD sufferers. And my job is to go out and find military folks that do with the help.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that, and enjoy seeing the results afterwards.
Well, I may introduce you to him. And it's interesting also, I did a couple of interesting things recently. One was to go to Peru and go to Machu Picchu and do the ayahuasca ceremony and the San Pedro ceremony, which also helps people with PTSD. A number of the servicemen have found those interesting experiences. And also doing the Hoffman Institute program, which I talked to you about in Byron Bay, they do, but they also do in the UK and America. That's very good for dealing with some of the issues that we carry with ourselves. Hey, look, there's so much for us to chat about. Let's just do some quick fire questions. We'll cover a few of these. Biggest regret in life, a crucible moment that shaped you, what would it be?
Ooh. Crucible moment. I'm thinking there.
That's fine.
Yeah. You asked me that question and I can't find what I put for my answer.
Don't worry, just what comes to the top of your head.
Oh, right. My crucible moments, I reckon, were all my near-death experiences.
How many did you have?
Well, I remember sitting with my son, my son's actually, before he passed, in a pub. I think it was the night of my younger son's 18th birthday. And they said, "Dad, how many near-death experiences have you had?" And we started listing them, and we got past 9, and I went, "Okay, I'm done." And so I think every time you have one of those, you kind of do a bit of a reevaluation.
Yeah.
But other crucible moments are acts of kindness. You know, when I left the Navy in February, this chap that runs the Remount charity, Ben, he said to me, "Oh, Jim, as a mark of you leaving, why don't you come round for a drink, on Wednesday night, about 5 o'clock?" And I went, "Oh, okay, yeah." Didn't really think much of it. I said, "Sally, Ben's asked us round for a drink," and she's okay. And I was embarrassingly, it didn't really work that hard to be there on time. So I rocked up about 5:15, and I'm driving down into the stables where he told me to go, and I see all these cars parked. And I go, "Oh, hang on a minute, what's going on here?" And he had assembled, some of my oldest friends, new friends, Navy friends, Remount friends, business chamber people. There must have been 30-odd people there.
Wow.
All just to say thank you for your service, which was really touching. And, those are crucible moments, because you realize people care about you. And it's really nice. It's really nice when people do that for each other, those acts of kindness.
Yeah, that's very special, and a real recognition of that. That's what counts for the people who know what you've done. That's where it counts. Going around the Inspire Leadership Compass, which we happen to use about what makes people high performers, and you, by anybody's standard, Jim, are, and you've trained people to be high performers. Your MQ, moral quotient, your values and beliefs. One quick tip: when you've come off your compass of your values that you hold true and dear, whether it be from your Protestant upbringing in those tough days in air, or whether it be things you'd learned in the Royal Marines or things you learned in the Australian Navy, when you come off your values, what do you do to bring yourself back on? What tip would you give people to get back on track?
Well, I think my true north, I know you use the term true north, is Sally. We've been together over 40 years. She keeps me on the straight and narrow. That thing that we must do is communicate. The power of talking and listening is so important. And shit just happens when you don't do it. It just does. When you drift apart from that constant communication, that's when, you know, old Murphy gets off his fence and invokes his law, and, you know, life gets rubbish. So, you know, I think we make a conscious effort. You know, we share each night, before we go to sleep, we share what was your highlight for today and what you're grateful for. Funny little thing. I encourage it when I'm coaching people, bring it into your life. Because it makes you reflect on your day, and it usually puts a smile on your face. And it's far better to go to sleep with a smile on your face than a scowl.
I love that. I love that. I've written it down. I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah.
I have a gratitude journal, 5minutejournal.com, which ends with what I'm grateful for. But I think saying it to each other, to Lee and myself. Meaning and purpose, PQ is the next one round. If you were to give people advice about finding their sense of meaning and purpose, what short tip would you give?
So I'm a great fan of defining your own life purpose. And I was helped by a coach many years ago to actually go through the discipline of writing my own. And mine is, I have found since I've written it, it makes life decisions incredibly easy, because you just measure that decision against your life purpose. And if it ticks the boxes, do it. If it doesn't, don't. Just don't even entertain that temptation of, you know, going off to climb Kilimanjaro, or, you know, that great offer to, you know, do this, that, or the next thing, take that job. If it doesn't hit your life purpose, don't do it, because it won't work for you.
Fantastic. Love it. I have mine on my wall here, and I just keep checking with it. And also sort of life priorities with your wife and your kids and grandkids in my case. Mental health and physical health been very important to you, particularly you keep yourself in great shape because you're what, 61? 62. Yeah. But looking in great shape and looking like something like from Indiana Jones for those who are listening around the world on Apple or Spotify or Google. But a top tip on keeping your physical health, particularly at the age that you and I are at, and also looking after your mental health now. What's your top tip on those, quickly?
Yeah. Top tip for physical health is core. I think if you keep your core strong, the rest of you will perform well. So I do that with a series of exercises, which I do 3 or 4 days a week, and they don't last more than 10 minutes. And I do Pilates, and I've got into, you know, once or twice a week doing reformer Pilates. Great coach that puts us through our paces, and I find that really useful.
Fantastic. And mental?
Mental, spoon carving. Learn to carve a spoon. You know, I'm delighted to say that my little hobby of turning a spoon is now a business, and I've found the joy of running a market stall and demonstrating people how to carve spoons, and then they want to buy them as well, which is even better.
That's fantastic.
That helps me buy more tools.
That's great. And now we're going to go on in a minute to the executive team's favorite book on leadership and your top tip. But if we're thinking about the other elements of the compass, I just want you to pick out one that you want to share a tip on. So we've got EQ, we've got sort of diversity and equality, or what I call cultural quotient, resilience, brand, legacy. So which would you pick, and what would your top tip be, Jim?
I think resilience. Like, we only get one life. In fact, my coaching company is One Life Coaching. We get one shot at it, and you know, you can sit back and mope around, feeling sorry for yourself. You can get up, dust yourself off, and get back in there, and that's what I do. And I encourage everyone else to do the same. And it's hard when you get knocked back. It's hard when you don't get the job you were aiming for. You know, you just need to get on with your life. and be aware that there's only one chance. You get one shot. And I often say to people in coaching, when you're sitting on your rocker, on your deck, and as the sun's going down, and you get your favorite tipple in your hand, and you reflect on your life, what do you not want to be thinking? If you're sitting going, I wish, I wish, I wish, that's not going to be very good.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there contented,
yeah,
it's in your power.
I really love that, Jim, and I'm very blessed. A lot of gratitude, a lot of appreciation for my life. I've messed up and got a lot of things wrong. I've had some setbacks. Things didn't work out quite as I wanted, but I've had a lot of blessings, a lot of gifts, and being married to Lee and having 4 kids and 2 grandkids, they're blessings. And the fact that Graham is alive, well, sadly David isn't, but Graham lived. Those blessings. So I'm each day I go, if my number's up today, I've had one hell of a day. Let's go on to favorite book on leadership. If you were to pick a book you've read on leadership or listened to, I listened to a lot of audiobooks, which one would you recommend to me and the people listening, Jim?
That was a real tough one. I read widely. I think I cracked about 65 audiobooks last year on my commute to work.
Wow.
And I listened to lots of different things, but so I think there's a lot to be learned from failed leadership, poor leadership. There is about good leaders. So, Steve Zalonga's George C. Patton, that's a powerful read. Bernard Cornwell's books on Uhtred. I know the fiction.
Yes, yeah.
On Uhtred, and the Last Kingdom books. Fascinating insight. And I know they're novels, but there's still a lot to learn because he does thorough research.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the author, but the book on Stalingrad. Haunting read.
Yeah.
And looking at the journeys of both the Russian and the German commanders, the strengths and failings, real lot to learn there. Peter Cosgrove, former Chief of Defence in Australia, his book, and a delightful little book I read recently called 537 Days of Winter, by David Knopf, and he led the Australian Antarctic Survey team through COVID, and they were stuck. They were stuck there for 537 days. They were only supposed to do a year, and of course they had that massive dislocation of expectations where they said, "No, you're not coming back. You're staying." That's tough, to go through another winter.
Wow, great stories. In fact, well, I remember Peter Cosgrove when I did exercise Rainbow Serpent, which was a sort of Americans, Brits, Canadians, New Zealanders training up Australian troops. It was for the East Timor operation we did. Peter Cosgrove was the general who briefed us all and talked to us all when we came to Sydney. And one of my good friends was General Paul Simons. I don't know whether you came across him in Australia at all, but a lovely, lovely man who did. He was instructor at Sandhurst with me, but you need to look him up. Okay. Finally, Jim, if you just introduce yourself again for the 2-minute top tip, because this stands in its own right, just say what you did, what you're doing now, and what your top practical leadership tip would be, and we'll finish there. Okay.
My name's Jim Hutton. I'm a carver of wooden spoons and a life and leadership coach. I have a history of being a colonel in the Royal Marines and a captain in the Royal Australian Navy, both of which were demanding and interesting and fantastic parts of my life. I think above all, be true to yourself. Speak up when you see something is wrong. Try to do the right thing. Ask for help of folk that you trust and respect. And it will be given willingly. And they will think the more of you for asking. Be there for people. Know yourself, understand yourself, figure out who you are, where you're going and how you're going to get there, and do the same for your people. And above all, communicate as best you can in every way you can.
Jim, wise words indeed. And thank you. You also have an OBE, which you modestly have not mentioned, but that's a hell of an award and a great recognition of all that you've done. It's been a true honor to have you on this podcast. You have the humility, the humanity, and a lovely bit of humor. So thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. Been a pleasure. Good luck to you.